Hey guys, welcome to another episode of our BKOT podcast series. I'm your host Ananya Tiwari, and today we have with us Sarah Dobek, founder and president of Inovautus Consulting. We are going to dive into smart strategies for ideal clients today, discovering the essential strategies for driving more strategic growth in accounting firms through technology and client acquisition. This podcast will explore how to leverage the latest tech innovations to streamline market approach to attract the right clients. Please tune in for further insights and practical tips on how to transform your firm into a modern client-focused powerhouse. How are you doing, Sarah? Can
I'm
you tell me a
doing,
little bit about yourself?
yeah, thanks. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I am the president and founder of Inovautus Consulting, and we are a consulting company that works with public accounting firms in the United States to primarily focus on how to grow and build a growth infrastructure. That usually encompasses a couple things. Typically, it's going to include some level of strategy, vision and strategy setting. It's going to include execution. So we do a lot of outsourced marketing for our clients, and then sales training and coaching is where we focus. And so we kind of come around all angles of growth and help firms figure out how best to grow and how to accomplish the growth that they desire.
I actually looked at your LinkedIn profile. It's quite diverse. I looked at everything. And can you tell me a little bit how this, and I know that you've worked in several sectors before. How did this concept and how does this idea of Innovatus Consulting came into place?
Yeah. Well, I'm fortunate that I've gotten to work inside of accounting firms for my entire career. And so it's what I knew. I started in a small firm in Chicago, and from there, I really fell in love with professional services marketing. I learned a lot for the first partners that I worked for, and taught me a lot about what marketing is in an accounting firm and for professional services. So much so that they were the first ones that launched me into consulting. And that's where I got a taste for being able to help others and being able to help them with marketing. And so I actually started the first form of this business when I was inside my accounting firm and realized that it was a lot more work to run a business than you realize. And it's not always about the things that you love doing. And so I really cut my teeth there, learning not only about consulting, but I learned a lot about how growth actually happens inside of accounting firm. And it's not just marketing and sales tactics. And that's a philosophy that we have at Inovautus Consulting today. And the lens that we look through is not just one about the tactics that are being accomplished, but what are the other things that are factoring into that? And we have 7 pillars at Inovautus that we look at for that. I won't dig into that today and take the whole podcast around that, but suffice it to say that we look very closely at the things that are going to impact growth, such as culture and process and accountability and leadership and vision. Those are important elements to all of it. And so after I left that accounting firm, I went to work for another organization doing consulting, and really got to do what I love doing, further solidifying some of the work that we're doing today. And then I eventually started Inovautus.
Wow, that's quite a journey.
Yeah.
I love that. Especially, when you're working somewhere and you never know where it's going to take you. Like you started with one thing and then you fell in love with another and you're like, okay, let me do this. And you find out like, okay, this is so much better. I love that. So you mentioned you typically work with consulting and marketing. So what is your ideal demographic? Like what are your ideal clients like?
Yeah, so we work with public accounting firms, typically mid-sized to large firms. And so these are going to be your larger local independent firms. And the US, most of them start around the $7 million range, $8 million range, and go on up from there that need our outsourced marketing services. We work with a lot of larger firms on strategy and sales training and coaching as well. So it kind of runs the gamut, but most of them are in the top 400 within the United States of
Wow,
accounting firms.
that's impressive.
Thank you.
And And do you feel like, and like I've been reading all of these articles these days continuously, do you feel like there are a lot of challenges these days in the way like the traditional accounting firms used to work before, and now it's completely different? They sort of have to change their ways to attract the ideal clients?
Well, I mean, yeah. So I don't think you can talk about public accounting without talking about the challenges that they're facing. But
Completely.
specifically as it relates to attracting their ideal clients, I think there's a couple things that are happening within the profession that are probably worth noting here as we open up this conversation on ideal clients. I think the first is that one of the things that we saw coming out of COVID very clearly with accounting firms is um, there was a lot of lack of clarity on ideal client. And this isn't something new. We've known this as advisors and consultants to the profession for a long time, as marketers and strategists. We've talked to firms about the importance of this. But one of the things that happens inside of accounting firms, public accounting firms in particular, is that they've been given a lot of freedom to pick their client bases. So each partner grows their own client base. And until they become a certain size or until there's a big enough pain point, a lot of firms just sort of allowed that to happen, right? And at some point, as they grow larger, there becomes other governance structures and more alignment, so to speak, around that. But for the majority of accounting firms, they didn't have this. Each partner had a different definition for what was an ideal client. Each service line had various different definitions, and there was no clarity around what that was. And what that presented was a lot of challenges related to bandwidth inside of accounting firms. We had taken on a lot of clients. We used to have this phrase that we used, we'll take anything breathing. Literally, partners would tell me that when I would ask them what their ideal clients were. And that was because we didn't always know how to develop business strategically. We were afraid that if we turned away something, we wouldn't have other business. And accounting is a leverage model, right? And so the more clients you have, the leverage you build, ideally your profits going up in theory. And what we found in COVID was there was such a mass increase of the need. We've seen a lot of consolidation coming out of the profession. There's not enough people doing the work, and all of that is leading to this massive bandwidth issue of what we can actually handle. And so the discussion that happened coming out of COVID was starting to be around, if we don't have enough people, then we have to start choosing which clients, which is fantastic. As a strategic marketer and growth advisor, I've wanted this conversation for decades, right? And so I love that this was the outcome. And over the last few years, firms have really been addressing this. Some are still starting that journey. A lot started that journey coming out of COVID to really say, who do we need to be serving? Who should we be serving? Who are we the best fit structure-wise to be serving? And so I think that lack of clarity is one of the things that has stood in the profession's way of doing that. And for each firm, when they address that lack of clarity and that alignment, tends to be a little bit different. The other big challenge that I've seen that's aided in having a struggle around this has really been data. Data inside of accounting firms is still a massive challenge. It's a mess. There's all these disparate systems. It's really difficult to pull the information together. It's painful, but that's been another challenge of really being able to have a line of sight on what that looks like.
Do you think, leveraging technology and all these softwares that we have these days, does it help with the data issue?
Yes and no, right?
Yeah.
I think technology can absolutely be an aid in some of this. And I would say that only if it's being managed correctly and if the technology has the ability to sort of have some sort of way to like share information. Now, that's part of the challenge that I see in the profession is that the technology that they're using does not integrate, right? There's no two-way sync for data. In a lot of cases, you can be on the same platform, but even some of the features enabled in there, it's just hard to get to the information. It's hard to manipulate it the way that you want. And so you have to go out and build these API tools in order to be able to do that. And sometimes they work well, and sometimes they just don't work very well. But the bigger challenge is that the data in the systems isn't always managed. And that's usually the first roadblock to any of this. If we have poor data in our systems, if it's not being managed, if we don't have processes and ways to identify when information changes, that's a big issue. And a lot of the systems that accounting firms use don't give you a way to notify that. They don't give you a way to easily manage the data from like a quality standpoint. We've got to create all of these other workarounds and processes, and that's been one of the roadblocks to getting good quality data, is the ability to kind of see that. Once we get that in place, are there other things that firms can build to be able to leverage all of that? 100% that they can, but managing that is half the battle, and we've just not given it enough attention. And taken the responsibility inside of our firms to say, this is critically important. We tend to call it an administrative task, right? Or that's a burden on our firm. And I've really tried to help firms reframe the importance of that, especially when we're like, oh, we have to go to another place to find information, and having clear alignment around how the technologies work together.
So do you have any tips on like how firms can leverage technology to enhance this?
Yeah, I think first is you've got to really understand what you can do with your systems. I also find that there aren't owners of technology inside the firms where they like somebody's responsible for really understanding the features. You need somebody that can connect the dots between things. Like there is this strategic overlook between the technology and how it all will and should work together. There's processes that have to be aligned, and that's usually where the technology fails. It's not necessarily in the features of the technology. It's that we don't have the right process in place. We're not clear on the ownership and the responsibilities to be able to maintain that. And so when we start talking about how do we manage data quality, the first step is it has to be somebody's responsibility. And we have to have clarity about what we're capturing, where it's going, and how we're doing that. Some of the technologies that we work with that help significantly on that are actually CRM systems. We're a HubSpot partner. It has a lot of marketing automation built in. It's a gold standard among CRM systems. Have we worked with others? 100%. Dynamics is really popular in the profession. Salesforce, those are really the top three that we tend to see in the public accounting profession. And part of what we do is we look at being able to identify technology. Oftentimes CRM is the place that we land, where there is a central place for client communication information that acts as a hub where it can send out spokes to the other technology that doesn't have the same capabilities to notify people when there's address changes or changes in active client status or something else that's changing, because most of the other public accounting firm systems, their tax systems, their audit systems, their workflow systems, practice management, they don't have these notification features that enable you to actually utilize that. And so when we talk about how do we leverage the technology, one is we need a system that's going to give us the ability to centralize a lot of the data, as well as notify us and support creating processes that allow us to manage the data across all the other systems.
Do you think personalization plays any role in like the modern client acquisition? And do you think technology can facilitate that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that there is a massive trend towards different forms of personalization. So the way that it shows up, or the way we're seeing it show up for a lot of accounting firms, first and foremost is how are we communicating with our clients and the market, right? If we're going to acquire, client acquisition, whether that is new revenue with clients that have not been with us before or new revenue with existing clients, we've got to do a better job segmenting. For years and years, we've done email marketing with one mass mailing list and a hope and pray strategy. And to be honest, people today just don't want that. There's too much noise in the marketplace. There's too much information. If you're going to send me something, make sure that it's relevant to me. And so being able to segment your client base around what interests them, what services we're providing to them, sending them only the information that matters is really important. And that kind of comes back to data, right? Being able to even identify what services we're providing to a client has been a huge challenge in public accounting. And so when we look at the marketing piece of it, part of personalization starts with how we segment our clients and being able to have some of that information at our fingertips. Oftentimes living in a CRM system that's tied into an advanced email marketing ability, right? And not even like super advanced. You can do it in some of the more standard, Constant Contact or MailChimp systems. But being able to segment those client bases, being able to build bit lists around interests based on what clients have shown, giving them the control to decide what information they want to receive from you, sans the essential information for clients. All of that becomes really important, and that's a first step towards personalization. A lot of us think personalization is like, can we add a name to an email? We can, but we're not going to do that until we know the names are correct in those emails and
That's
it
true.
says, "Dear Sarah," right? Because if we get the name wrong, then we failed miserably at the personalization. And so there's a lot of risk there. But part of personalization, I think the more important part is the information we're sending to them and how we're communicating with them. And if we can tackle that, that tends to be more successful in professional services marketing around client acquisition than just the, adding a name, which is what we often think of as personalization.
That is true. And sometimes, in some of the softwares, they can't even get that right. I've seen so many emails. I'm like, that is not me.
Oh yeah, I love
So,
it when I get cold emails that tells me I'm an accounting firm. I'm not an accounting firm. You have not looked at my website. You clearly don't understand that I work with accounting firms, but I'm actually not an accounting firm. It's really entertaining, and I hit delete every single time.
yeah, most of them just land in my spam, and I'm like, come on, man, do some research. What are
Yeah,
you doing?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Could you share some examples of like you mentioned that you've worked with a lot of firms before? How has if this approach has been helpful and how this data-driven approach has been, improved the client acquisition outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. So we worked with a firm a couple of years ago where we were engaged to do their outsourced marketing, and they took the very traditional approach that I had shared with you, one mailing list, one newsletter that sort of kind of went out on a consistent cadence. And they had okay open rates, but not great open rates. I mean, we've definitely seen much better among client bases around this, and they weren't doing a lot of external marketing yet. So this was just being able to communicate with their existing
Oh,
clients.
okay.
And so, we came in, we restructured their list segmentation, and we built out a bunch of lists that would support the type of content that was going out and the information that we were sharing with people. And what we saw out of that was almost a 300% increase in
Wow.
engagement rate, both like opens, which I put less stock in opens today because of some of the changes that were made over the last few years, but engagement rate went way up with that client, and it stayed steady with them pretty significantly. And this was a decently large firm that we had worked with in the middle market, and was really just the starting point. I mean, I consider what we did like sort of bare essentials on segmentation for their
Yeah.
client base. I mean, we have basic like service lists and industry lists so that we could build whatever we needed very quickly based on the content that was going out. And we saw a really great response rate. The other thing that we did for them that was really successful is we wanted to be able to grow our interest lists. And so instead of, because we had more communications that needed to go out and they were very varied as far as the audience, what we did is we created a monthly roundup of their news, their content, their information. And that's the one that we sent to the entire list. And as they clicked through on articles, they were added to interest lists. And so that enabled us to grow our lists pretty effectively and focus on what clients cared about in some of those. And it went over super well with them and made it a lot easier to get the information out and to get it to the right people. I've always believed that I'd rather send to a smaller group of people that are highly engaged than a
Yes.
larger list that's unengaged.
That's brilliant though. I mean, to have to think about it that way, I'm just amazed right now.
Yeah.
And I understand. I mean, like anytime that you go into this, is there some sort of resistance sometimes that you face from like the internal staff, or it's always just like, okay, you know, let this girl do what she does?
Oh my gosh. We always face resistance, right? When we talk about growth, I mean, anything that we're doing in the marketing space, anything we're doing is going to require change management. Sometimes that change management is tiny and it doesn't impact people, and sometimes it's big, and sometimes there's just fears. And so when you talk about segmentation, 100%, we will often face some resistance and fear around this. And usually the fear is centered around like, well, what if somebody's offended that they don't get an email from us? Or what if we forget to include them, right? I think part of the mindset that we have to go into is that nothing is perfect. And we tend to see much better results with the segmentation when we're sending it. I mean, we can look at lists and see who is and isn't engaging with the content at the end of the day. And so part of resistance is understanding what is the underlying fear or concern and trying to address that. And sometimes it's just a leap of faith to say, give us a little bit of time to like try it and see how it's going. There's other ways that we can address, some of the fears that we have in there. But we run into it every day, and it's a change management process at the end of the day. And sometimes that's a short runway and sometimes that's a really long runway. But we have to be able to look at it through that lens and recognize that sometimes resistance is also a sign of growth. And we forget that, right?
Completely agree. Yeah.
We just assume that like somebody's like, I don't want to do this, but right, if any of us have children, we know that like sometimes teaching them things requires the tantrum first and then the acceptance of whatever's
Yeah,
come
completely
after
agree.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't like to see tantrums in adults, but like it shows up different ways. Like, I don't want to do this, or I'm refusing to do this process. And then there's accountability that has to be get involved. And then there's like acceptance, but it requires a lot of reinforcement. Like, this is our new process. You have to do it. No, we're not changing this. Like, here's how we're going to do it. And marketing's a little trial and error. So I don't want to make it sound like when we make a change that we're not willing to like look at analytics or look at what's working and what's not working. Because sometimes when we try something, it doesn't work. I have done things with in theory the ideal types of client bases from one client to the other. And for one client, it works swimmingly well when we make a change and we do something specific. And the other client, for whatever reason, it just does not work out well. Their client bases are different. They have the same profiles, similar attributes, but for whatever reason, they just engage differently. So you got to be able to, take everything you're doing with a grain of salt and be able to look at it in the marketing realm and say what's working and what's not working, and read the results of that and use that to inform what you're doing.
It's a continuous process anyway. I mean, like one day it will work and you find yourself like doing the same thing 3 years later and it might not work in that particular demographic at that time. It's continuously evolving. How do you like keep up with these changes? And it's a lot. Every day, it's
Yeah.
something else.
I think it just takes a lot of learning, right? Like CPAs, as marketers and salespeople, we're reading a lot. We're doing a lot of our own online training and education, but a lot of it comes from consuming content, and then trial and error. Experience plays a big part in marketing. There's a lot of trends, but trends don't always work. Part of what we do as professional services marketers is we take whatever everybody's talking about in the B2C environment, and then we have to dissect it for what's going to work in a B2B environment where we are selling an intangible product to another human being, where emotion factors in a greater deal than it does when buying a product. And so it is much harder to sell an intangible service that is somebody's skill sets and experience than it is to sell a tangible product, right? It's a much more complex marketing scenario. And so our team pulls a lot from experience in reading how things work, to be able to deliver on that.
It's sort of similar to what we do. Like when I started working with a company, and it has been a long time now, initially I would just have to explain to people how the entire model works. And they would look at it and they'd be like, nope, not doing it. And I would have to just accept it. Like, okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. Maybe we try this. And and then you will meet someone else and they'll be like, well, love it. Let's start. but it has always also been like sort of a continuous learning process in this, that okay, we need to educate more people, okay, we need to bring in more communication, okay, we need to be more transparent maybe sometimes, and all of these things. And I mentioned like resistance, it's sometimes it gets a lot. I, as on a very personal level, when I think about it and when I talk to people, and when I tell them that, this is what something that I would recommend we should do. And they're like, nope, no explanation, just
Yeah.
nope. And I'm like, but why? And sometimes it becomes very disheartening. And then you have to just, like you mentioned, just have to take it with a grain of salt and be like, okay, maybe this doesn't work for you. And
Well, one
yes,
of the things I learned a long time ago in marketing is to plant seeds and
yes,
let the seeds
yes.
grow. Like sometimes the first
Yeah.
thing you bring up, it's going to be a hard no. We're not doing that. And then you kind of like bring it up again. And there's a little less hard no, and like, well, maybe. And then they
Yeah.
go to some external resource, they read an article or somebody else says something, they're like, hey, I've got this great idea. And I would always just sit back and smile when my partners would do that to me. And I would go, okay, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. I didn't care whether it was my idea or it came from an article they read or a
Yeah, as
conference
long
they
as they
went
implement it.
to.
Yeah.
As long as they came back and we accomplished the goal of moving the firm forward or moving our mindset forward or embracing some sort of change, my clients love and hate it about me. Like they know that I will mention things, I won't push them too hard. We always believe in meeting our clients where they're at, but I'm
Yes,
not going to say
exactly.
the thing that needs to be, not say the thing that needs to be heard. And I'll be strategic about when and where I place those things, right? Sometimes I'll be like, I can't do that right now, right? And
Yeah.
come back and go, hey, we really need to work on this year. This has got to be a priority. Here's why this is important. Right. And so like sometimes it's taken a couple of years to get like a larger initiative pushed through. And the other thing I've learned is firms have to be ready for it too, right? And so sometimes
Yes.
that planting of the
Couldn't
seed
agree more. Yeah.
or being able to shift another behavior, pipelines are a great example, right? I mentioned CRM earlier. When we're talking about being able to work through a journey of change, we've got to have other things in place on the ideal client journey, right? And like being able to align your ideal client, they don't go from being able to start this conversation to being able to, significantly increase their minimums overnight. It's for a lot of our clients, it's a 2 to 3 year journey to work through the stages of identification of what their ideal client is, trying to put in place the things that enable them to like remove the clients that are unideal to be able to elevate the average size of an engagement that they're working on. Like that's a scary journey and it affects how we sell. And we have to have the confidence to be able to do that. We have to have the confidence that when we let go of work, we're going to replace it.
Yes.
Promise you always do. You always do. You create room in the universe for us to bring on more of
Yeah.
that work. But, that's not something that we just do in like 3 months, right? And so that's like a great example. And so, if we're looking to up our client acquisition, like we've got to start all of those things before we can go do something that's more external and say, like, let's turn on our marketing automation, let's turn on our list segmentation, let's get clear about what we want if we haven't done some of these other pieces first.
No, I agree. And this is something that I always say. It might be slow, but it will be sustainable. You'll be able to reap the rewards for a longer period of time. And that's exactly what we're looking for here. I mean, it's not something that you can, it's not like a heartbeat that you can go like this, like this, like this. It doesn't have to be. It needs to be sustainable and it might take time, and that is okay.
Yeah,
But at least it will last longer. So,
absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah.
I agree more.
So, and do you think there are what are some practical tips that you can give to accounting firms? I mean, because that is like sort of our whole demographic, to integrate the technology that you mentioned seamlessly into maybe their existing workflows or something new that they can add? Any
Yeah,
advice would be
so
helpful.
I think anytime we're making a big change in technology, I think being able to map out what we want to do in phases is really important. We have a lot of firms that will go through pilot programs with any new technology. Sometimes that's a small group of users that are testing it. Like this works well in CRM systems when we're rolling it out and trying to get the kinks out. Sometimes the pilot program is just a small group of people with a few partners that are using the sales seats. Sometimes it's just marketing, like working and using something until we're ready to pull in the rest of the firm and all of the client data and some of those things. But I think pilot programs help. The other thing that we do when we roll out and integrate like any kind of like marketing technology that's going to impact the rest of the firm, like a CRM system, is we phase it. And we tell them like, our goal in the first 12 months is let's get accurate data in, let's make sure we're handling our processes, and let's focus on clients, right? Maybe there's some ancillary prospect data that's coming in and other things that we're doing, right? But we have like really clear expectations on whatever the client is and whoever we're working with around what does that look like. If we're rolling out just a marketing team, technology, same thing. Like, what are our expectations around this in year one? There's a lot of nice to haves, but we really try to say, let's knock these out first. Let's master this. And then let's add in the others. And we don't wait too long. If we get there in 6 months instead of a year, cool, let's move on to phase 2. But if it takes a little longer, let's let it take a little longer. Because if you move too fast and try to do too many things at one time, it's just not going to work as well.
Couldn't agree more. Slow and steady. And, and like you mentioned, it's very, very important that you have a team in place that tests it fast to, take out the kinks. And you know how accounting firms are these days. A lot of people are not as technically sound as we would like them to be.
Yeah. And I think we put a lot of pressure on technology to solve all of our problems. And I think it's really important to understand that it's not. Even if we're using it for marketing, like the input going in, our brains still need to operate. Somebody's got to like think about these things and connect the dots. Like AI is great. That piece of technology is fantastic. It's enhanced what we do in a positive way. And we use it a lot as marketers. And I would say it does not replace what we're doing. Like, I still need super smart people that understand what we're doing and can look at it and go, that's not right. It's not for what we want. Like, we have to have the vision for what we want to get out of it, right? We can't just like dump it in there and hope that it's going to do the job of a marketer, because it's not. It has to be massaged and manipulated, and you got to know what to ask it. And the same thing with technology. Like, you've got to know what you need to do with it, and you've got to have somebody that can create the process. A ChatGPT, AI can't do that. Can they enhance certain things? Can they give you a starting point? 100% that they can, right? And there's a lot of other ways they can pull data and take manual effort out of things, and that's what we want it to do. But there is still a very strong human element to all of this.
No, I completely agree. And this is something that I always say, we should use it like a tool. It shouldn't become like a crutch.
Absolutely. Yes, 100%.
Yeah. I want AI to help me, but not take over everything that I'm doing. Otherwise, what would I do?
Yeah, it's a fantastic assistant, right?
Yeah. And it is happening these days. And people get so disheartened sometimes when I talk to them. I'm like, some great writers I talk to, and all of these people, and they're like, well, AI is taking over. And I'm like, you're wrong. Nothing can take over what you can actually do. It's there to help. And if my entire job would be taken over by AI, what would I do? And I don't think it would be done in the similar way, like you said. There still needs to be a lot of human element to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So coming to like a close, I know we've talked a lot about it, but what kind of emerging trends do you predict will shape client acquisition strategies in the coming years?
Well, we've already talked about the importance of AI, so I won't mention that, but there's generative SEO that is really changing the SEO and search engine marketing game. And so I think that's going to have a big play. I mean, SEO has always been an important part of client acquisition. And so when firms are really ready to move beyond, the farming, the referral sources and things like that, which is where a lot of public accounting firms traditionally sit, is referral based still today. It's usually more than 50% of their lead generation. And so they get a point where they're ready to move beyond it, and we need a stronger inbound strategy for what they're doing. And so the generative SEO, and I'm not using that exact right phrase, but my brain's not connecting the dots yet today. That's going to be a big impact, I think, because there's going to be less people visiting sites. And so how we structure our content is going to be really important. And then being able to pull them in is going to start to look a lot different. And then I'm really intrigued by voice search. It hasn't quite hit the
Yes.
public accounting profession yet, but I think that's another one that's going to have a big impact for us. And that's one that's on my radar to pay close attention to.
Love the voice search. I feel like all of my problems are being solved these days. I won't even have to type. I'm like, yes, this is the technology I'm talking about. Don't let me do anything. Just tell me.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so those are the things I think will impact us. I'm sure there's lots of other trends and things that are going to pop up that will too, but those are the ones on our radar.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This was really insightful information you shared with us today. I learned so much. Like when I started the call, silch. Now I feel like I can actually go in and talk about marketing. So
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you
thank
for
you so
having
much.
me. I've enjoyed the conversation so much as well.
Thank you. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. And also to our amazing audience, we hope you enjoyed today's episode and we have more in the works over the next few weeks. Please follow our social media channels and like, subscribe, comment, all the jazz. Follow notifications to hear on for our next episodes. Thank you. Take care.